Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about having discipline. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how do you get yourself so disciplined as to make videos and learn continuously? Is there any trick that you can give away for me who wants to be a software developer and who needs to have the discipline to continue my journey? So, uh, yes, I think I can give you a few tips on this. Uh, Discipline and like having, I mean, I'm a human just as everybody else. As far as I know, uh, the way that I stay disciplined is to first and foremost sort of identify my goals. Because I believe that discipline, I have my own personal saying where I say that anything that involves a human has to have one or two things. Either it has to have a physical limitation or it has to have an incentive system. One of these two things are required for anything that a human is going to do over time if it's going to continuously work. Anything that is based on human interest alone is never going to work. That's why every single time you have these sorts of agreements with people, well, we should just remember to empty the dishwasher or clean up after ourselves and so on, it always fails. Because if it's not providing an incentive to do so that is strong enough, they're not going to do it because they have no reason to care. Or if there's not like something physical that is forcing them to do it, they're still not going to care. And that is why I completely I do not believe at all that it is possible for a person to not to achieve a long-term goal without one of these two things. Now, physical limitation is very difficult to have when it's you're dealing with something as being committed to like having time and actually putting effort into learning something or becoming a better software developer. But the way that you can do it is with the other way, the incentive system, and that really comes down to something that is very difficult, and that is, unfortunately for you, how much do you want this? So what I usually say to people who as an example, have a problem maintaining their weight, is that if you don't care enough about being thin, nothing you do will matter. Because it's not important to you. Because nobody's going to pay you to get thin. That's why the economy works the way it does, because for a lot of people, unfortunately, this is not always true, but a lot of people, guys, they don't go to work because they like it. They go to work because they need money. There's an incentive system. And the same thing goes for a lot of stuff that happens. It's just that when you do something for yourself that only really benefits, or rather where the only people who really care about it is you, well, then you have to create your own incentive system. And for me, the incentive has always been fairly straightforward. I have a personal drive to achieve certain goals. So if we talk about making videos as an example, well, it's a symbiotic relationship for me, because the need that I have to share my thoughts on software development, it's almost therapeutic in a way for me to sit here and talk. I get to, because it's something that, how do I put this? I cannot possibly find a group of people where I can have all these conversations and still have friends, but at the same time I feel a need to talk about these sorts of things, and I have this desire to help some people out and see if my thoughts and ideas can help someone else, and if I can give that away for free on the internet, that's perfectly fine. This, as I said, it's sort of, it almost becomes a journal, if that makes sense. And some people do journal and some people do other things, and this is sort of my thing. I've said to people before, this is just a hobby that I do for my own personal enjoyment, and to give something that to people that might not find what they need on the classical YouTube videos where you have like these content creators who claim to be real software developers. This is something that but it's still just something I do because I enjoy it. So I have a lot of incentive to do so because I feel good about doing it. Same thing with if you want to be the sort of person who wakes up really, really early and does exercising and so forth. It's actually more difficult than creating a routine. Like that's where you can get in like a limitation type of thing where you just set your alarm clock and go up at that time. And it's very difficult for you because it's not technically a physical limitation that it's a limitation that you create for yourself, but it's going to get you to at the very least wake up. Then you can of course skip it and ignore it because it's within your power to do so. Ideally you should have a system there where you can't actually do anything but to comply. It's sort of like having a wall. That's the perfect way for you to keep away from getting to whatever is on the other side. But for learning, it's similar exactly the same sort of thing. I use the same principle where I have a goal or a need or something that I want in order to achieve, and in order to achieve it, I have to actually start working towards it. So an example would be most of the projects. If you check my GitHub account, there's a lot of content like for videos and things like that when I've like thought about making a video. And if you check, some of the content is definitely like for just teaching purposes and showing your like different basic concept. But a lot of it is actually just me showing you my thoughts on certain approaches to certain problems because I find it interesting in trying to formulate an example of how to solve that problem. Like how do you structure microservices? How do you do event sourcing? How do you deal with like the CQRS pattern and so forth and so forth? And then I have learning projects where I try to create my own like systems, CLIs, different types of utilities and things like that, because one part is that I want to make those tools for myself so I can use them, but another part is that I actually have it's actually a way for me to use that product to learn about a different concept. I do this quite often where I find a goal, I find something that makes me interested. That's why I'm not the best person in the world to talk to about things that I don't find interesting, because I can't. That's my secret sauce into everything I do. I have to want it, and if I want it, I can set up these like restrictions and like these sorts of incentive systems are all around it. So an example would be if I want to learn about machine learning, well then the first thing is to learn the basics about machine learning and then find a problem where machine learning would be the best way of solving that. And I do that today, for example. Like I have a personal project that I work on where the only way I'm going to be able to solve that, create that system, is to use something like machine learning and other concepts and so forth and so forth. And then it grew and it became this sort of interesting thing, and now it's actually something that I really want to work on. It's it's similar to wanting to get into shape. It's easier for you to get up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever you're doing, right? And actually being disciplined if there is a reason as to why you want to do this. All the other stuff doesn't really matter unless you have the drive to do it, because as I said, there is no one apart from you who gives a shit about or like is gonna like get you to do something. The only incentive systems and like physical restrictions that you have are the ones that you create. Then you have to know yourself well enough to structure your environment and your incentive system so that it makes it worth doing, if that makes sense. An example would be if you wanted to lose weight, well, then the best way for you to do that is to create a routine, usually where you get incentive to go and like the basic incentive is of course that you want to be healthy and like look nice or whatever, look fit, etc. But then you have to consider the other part, and that is when you don't feel a high level of incentive, because nobody's going to pay you to get fit, and at the same time if you forget about the physical restriction, such as for work, you go to work to make money, and if you do not show up, you will not get money. There will be consequences, etc. And if you think about carrot stick types of situation and create those things around you, it's actually very easy to stay disciplined, as with being fit. If you don't have any junk food at home, then you're not going to eat junk food, most likely. So I hope that makes sense to you. So what I want you to take away from this is that my tips for you, if these are just my personal tips that I've used throughout the years, it's the same same thing that I used to become a software developer, to not be super fat and things like that. It really comes down to understanding that the way that humans usually work when it comes to doing things is that either there's a physical limitation, like a restriction or a consequence or something that you don't want to happen, or there is an incentive system, something that you do want. And when you combine those two, it's usually very easy to create a structure, like a structure or like a routine or something that you're gonna do on a schedule, or something which is always going to move you in a certain direction, because fear and reward, or consequences reward, is usually how most of us do our thing. So for me, it really comes down to saying that start by just having something that you find very interesting, or something that feels rewarding to do. That's number one. And number two is create an environment around you where you're either simulating, or ideally it's very good if you actually create, like, that sort of the theory behind why personal trainers work. Because if you pay a person to help you get into shape, one part is that they're going to tell you about nutrition and like all these sort of things, but at the same time it's actually a very strong motivator, because you're actually losing money if you don't do the work. You're actually paying someone who's going to help you, but if you never do the workouts, well, then you're basically just throwing money away, and that is a bad sensation. If it's a consequence, if that makes sense. Setting your alarm clock at a time, even though it's like might not be your training, or always getting up at the same time, etc., etc. It's the same sort of deal. You're forcing yourself into a situation that is you create a situation where you fall into the pit of success. And for me, when it comes to software development especially, if I want to learn a concept, it's really important to create an environment where learning that concept is a prerequisite to achieving the goal that I want. So an example, if you want to learn to be a hacker, or you want to be a machine learning person or something, take on a challenge where those skills are necessary. Sort of like survival training. It's, if you really want to check if you know how to survive out in the wild, go out into the wild. And just see if you can put yourself in a situation where you actually need to test those skills and actually use them to you can simulate it. Of course, you don't have to be in a life and death situation, but I hope that you understand what I'm saying. You have to create a environment and create this carrot stick type of situation for yourself, where you're always going to move in the direction that you want. That is what I use at the very least, and it's been working really, really well for me throughout my life. Have a great day.